Hello, hello. So today is my first official discussion of the first chapter of this book, the Book of Testimonies, 10 Testimonies That Will Change Your Life. My previous post was more of a discussion, of an introduction. Today I'm actually going to talk more about some of the chapters in this book as I talk about prayer. I've chosen to do so because the book itself is about prayer. If you want to follow along more closely, there's a link to purchase it on the page. Some of the proceeds from the purchase go to help children who are in an orphanage or other ministries that serve children. So feel free to purchase if you would like to follow along closely. Otherwise, you can just listen. It's mostly a summary of the chapters in the book, but used as a way to kind of explain and give examples of the effectiveness of prayer. So today I have titled my discussion the power of now in prayer. So that's the title of this discussion, the power of now in prayer. And it's really set, I want to throw back to a time when, I just experienced an event in my life that kind of led me to just see how sometimes when we have as Christians, and I do believe that this particular discussion today would be very helpful to someone who's already Christian, who already prays, but just needs a little bit more help with understanding, and fine-tuning their prayer life. And that doesn't mean that someone who's not a Christian won't benefit, but I do think the subject matter would probably be more helpful to someone who's looking for some assistance to kind of strengthen up their prayer life. But anyways, sometimes as Christians, we have a set idea of what prayer should look like, and at times that kind of hinders us in being responsive when we have a need or an urge or a burden to pray, as we call it, because we feel like, okay, I don't have privacy, or I'm not kneeling down, or I don't have a space, or I'm engaged in something else. Sometimes that prevents us from actually just going ahead and stopping whatever we're doing and just taking that moment to pray. This experience that I had that kind of helped me to break that thought process or that stereotype, of how I should pray and how I should conduct my prayer life. It happened, a while back, just in the early days of my life as a Christian. I remember one time that, I had been out very late at night with a friend I was in college. So with my prayer partner and my study partner, we had been out, studying. And on the way back, I suddenly just had a very strong burden, as we would call it, to just stop whatever I was doing and just pray, And when I shared that with her, we stopped, we prayed, and I think that kind of delayed us getting home by about, I would say, from 15 to 30 minutes or maybe more. But I look back to that time because when I finally made it back home, the first thing that I noticed was that the door of my home was wide open, and at first I just thought, okay, somebody must be up late, watching TV or whatever. And I went in, and when I got in, I saw the place in disarray. I saw the TV gone. Evidently there had been a break-in, and so what came to my mind was that had I not stopped to pray at the time that I had that burden, and if I had just continued to come back home, it was very likely, in fact I think that was what would have happened, that I would have happened on the robbers as they were kind of robbing the house, and in those days and times, as I remember, and even now, when you startle someone who's conducting a robbery, typically that doesn't end very well. So I believe that ability which God gave me at the point in time to respond to that need to pray. We were already walking. It wasn't like there was some private place where I could kneel down and pray or anything. That responsiveness was what kind of prevented me from happening on a very negative situation. And so I just use that today as an example of how, if you read Ephesians chapter 6, verse 18, and I'm referencing in particular the NIV translation, but other translations as well. It says something about, pray in all manners of prayers, or pray different types of prayers, and I say that to point out that, prayer is not in only one format, and I think I said that in my introduction. You could say 4 words that are heartfelt, and that could be a prayer for you, and that could actually have tremendous impact in whatever it is that you're seeking. And you could, respond to an urgent burden to pray, and that could make the difference, as in my situation, between life and death, having something terrible happen and being spared from experiencing something terrible. So that was the story that came to mind when I was thinking about this this post today, is that prayer is a now thing. Oftentimes I know that you can have a routine, and that there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with having a routine of a set time when you pray, and that's fine. But there are also other times when you need to respond to what your heart or what your spirit is telling you, because there might be an urgency for someone to pray, to intervene, to intercede, to prevent something from happening. And if we live according to stereotypes, I think there's also something in the book of Galatians chapter 5, where it talks about let's walk in step with the Holy Spirit, so sometimes responding to a strong urge or a leading is kind of like walking in step, and it doesn't always, that needs to walk in step doesn't always happen at a convenient time. It doesn't always happen at a time when we think is the right time. And if we insist on going by what we think, or we insist on delaying until that better time arrives, oftentimes we miss out on the opportunity. And when it comes to the now prayer, the prayer that needs to be said now, the urgent prayer, a lot of times when you miss that inclination, that burden, that leading to pray, it's usually is going to result in something devastating happening. That has been my experience. Is that sometimes God will just use someone else. I have to say that too. But sometimes it also results in something, you missing an opportunity. You missing an opportunity for blessing, missing an opportunity for protection, missing an opportunity to be used of God to protect someone else, or missing an opportunity to prepare yourself for and overcome a challenge, that could very much be coming down the pipeline, to further, expand on this point. I want to, reference, informally reference, I'm not going to quote any chapters or verses, but if you remember Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, if you remember when Jesus had said to Peter that the devil has asked for him to be able to sift you, but I'm praying for you. And when he had asked the disciples to pray with him in the garden, and instead they were overcome by the need to sleep. And then shortly after he had gone and labored in prayer, where it says that he was praying until his tears like blood were falling from his forehead. After he had labored in prayer, then all these things started to transpire. He got arrested. Peter or someone else pulled out the swords to attack the people who were arresting. Then subsequently, when he was taken away, Peter was tempted and lied 3 times, just like Jesus had prophesied. One wonders if Peter and the disciples had prayed when Jesus had asked them to pray, whether all of those things would have transpired in that manner. So I just say this to say that, there is a now time for prayer, and, don't delay. When you have those unctions, if you have the benefit of being able to pull out, off the road, if you have the opportunity to go somewhere private and pray, by all means. But if you don't, find a way to, expend that burden, because for all you know, you may be saving your life, you may be saving somebody else's life, and God is not always going to present, things the way that we are used to, in the way that's convenient for us. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to fit yourself into his plan, as opposed to trying to fit his plan into your own plan. So that's what I wanted to share today, regarding how sometimes the burden to pray can happen and come upon you suddenly. And if you want to have a successful prayer life where you see, because another thing that I also notice is that when those prayers that come like that, where you have a burden, a certain urge to pray, oftentimes when you fall, I want to say in my life, all times, I want to say, I don't know about other, but in my life, all times when I respond, when I immediately pray, I always have the victory. Those prayers that come suddenly, and oftentimes, all the times that I've experienced that, when I've obeyed, I've always had the victory. Those, I've always, when I respond to those kind of leadings, I make the time, I stop whatever I'm doing, I cry out to the Lord, I pray. I've always had the victory. I've always had a testimony of salvation, a testimony of divine provision. I even remember another story that just comes to mind now, that I didn't even think about, but it comes to mind. I remember once I had gone to buy a car, and it had just been a rough process. You know how it can be going to a dealership. It had been a rough process, trying to negotiate and everything. And just at the day that I was supposed to go pick the car up, finally, I went, and then I saw that the car was damaged. It was a white car. The front bonnet, the bumper was damaged. And I said to the salesperson, did someone sit on the car, because it looks dented? And he was telling me, I don't see anything. And I couldn't understand how I could be seeing very clearly, and he was saying that he couldn't see, But I remember that I had prayed that God, before I'd gone there, I prayed, don't allow me to be deceived, don't allow me to settle for anything that's not a correct or a right deal. And I was able to kind of stand my ground in spite of his attempt to intimidate me and make me feel like I didn't know what I was talking about. I was able to stand my ground and insist. Only for him to later on, after I said, I'm not taking delivery of this car, I see it as damage. I don't know why you don't see what I'm saying, but I'm not taking delivery of this car. So, after trying to intimidate me and threaten me into going ahead with the deal and me standing my ground, the next day, sure enough, someone in the, delivery review team, or whatever they call the team, admitted that there was some damage to the car, and we will try to get you another car. But I was just wondering to myself, had I not prayed fervently before going into that transaction, whether he would not have been able, because it was embarrassing in a way to put my foot there. It almost seems like I was trying to make an excuse to back out of the deal, because he, to all intents and purposes, was arguing and saying, well, why we don't see any damage, you're just making up things. So I wonder if I had not prayed, and would I have had the strength of mind to insist on what and stand my ground and say, hey, I see a damage in this car, I'm not buying it. So again, I just want to encourage that, pray as you're led. Don't wait for the perfect time. It's not always going to be perfect, and that's okay. And most times, if you want to see answers, miraculous answers that will touch your heart and strengthen your faith, follow those leadings. Those inopportune times that you take the time to follow the leading of the Holy Ghost, those are very blessed times. Those are times when you're very likely to get an answer to your prayer. So I hope this post today blesses someone who's listening. And please continue to follow, like, subscribe, and very important to share. It's very important to share. It's not so much about subscribing, although I certainly appreciate it if you subscribe, and I certainly appreciate if you like, but if you share, because so many people in this day and age, they either don't pray as Christians, or they've prayed, and because they don't get answers, they feel like prayer is not effective. And I hope that this post that I did today, pointing out to there are times when you are very likely to get an answer, and praying in response to a clear leading from God, a clear unction, a clear burden, has always, in my own experience, been a time where I have experienced miraculous answers and testimonies when I responded. So I hope you respond to all leadings today to pray, and I hope that this is a blessing. Thank you for listening. God bless you. Bye-bye.